As the story of VIC MIGNOGNA and the accusations made against him continue, it looks like the members of the #KickVic movement are beginning to take a step back from Twitter, as they now understand that Ty Beard and his law firm are now going to be coming down hard on individuals such as Jamie Marchi, Monica Rial, Toye, MarzGurl, Jessie, Pridemore, and many others, and we have some very interesting screenshots to showcase here today, alongside discussing the premise of being a hypocrite in comparison to what's going on with VIC MIGNOGNA currently right now. As once more before we begin, if you guys are new to this channel and of course love anime and Dragon Ball, alongside want to be up to date with all the latest involving VIC MIGNOGNA, Monica Rial, Jamie Marchi, Toye, and the entire situation, then be sure to go on ahead and punch that subscribe button and turn on all notifications to never miss a single upload and to be up to date with all latest news and information, along with checking out and subscribing to my primary channel Unreal and Gaming, where on there we are going to be covering lots of Dragon Ball content, anime, and gaming, so make sure you guys go ahead and check that channel out over there, alongside following me on Twitter at Unreal and Gaming for all the latest updates, including if you guys have any articles and or pictures to tag me in or share with me, be sure to go ahead and follow me on Twitter. Now, the hypocrisy continues to grow over on the #KickVic movement, as an individual that goes by the name of Jason Lee went out to tweet at MarzGurl, having to state, and I quote, "At MarzGurl, no, you are not excused for what you said 10 years ago in a podcast. James Gunn wasn't, so why should you? Just because you learned from it since? He did too. Won't stop anyone in 2019 complaining about it. Don't be a hypocrite. Just be a human, own it, don't make excuses." As MarzGurl went on to reply, and I quote, "Didn't ask to be excused. I do own it, I did it, and I take an L." As an individual that goes by the name of Wolfang responded by saying, and I quote, "I gotta be honest, you have some guts after what you did, starting a movement which was the #KickVic movement, being a total hypocrite. I always thought people in this movement would be smart. I was totally wrong. Your movement needs the judgment from the gods themselves, fools and idiots, hypocrites." As another individual by the name of Nunya went on to respond, "Honestly, Vic did the same thing. He said he made a joke and in poor taste, and yet people continue to crucify him. You want to put your dirty business out there, that's fine, but don't be a hypocrite." Now again, this goes back to MarzGurl's comments 10 years ago on a podcast, to where she made fun of rape victims. She was laughing at rape victims. She was insulting black people. She was insulting homosexuals. She was insulting a lot of people, and still till this day it's not excusable for her to be allowed to continue these actions if individuals such as James Gunn and many others like VIC MIGNOGNA have admitted to doing stupid things at stupid times, but yet still continue to be crucified for their comments. And in this case, an individual such as MarzGurl cannot possibly be allowed to walk away freely from this, when number one, she was the one that called for #KickVic to begin with, and number two, she's trying to persuade the community to let her go by making these comments, but in the same essence, not allowing VIC MIGNOGNA to be excused or forgiven for his supposed actions, but meanwhile only looking after herself. That in and of itself is being a hypocrite. As it goes on to continue, MarzGurl posts, and I quote, "I know that in my past I definitely hurt people with my words," which she did. "For that, I could not be more ashamed. I was much more self-centered in my early 20s and didn't even begin to think about how what I said hurt people, even those closest to me. That's why I understand why people are upset at what they have now heard me say from the past. It was wrong of me then, it hurt people then, I apologize then, and if people are hurt by it now, then of course I'm sorry that my words caused them pain." As an individual that goes by the name of Dave responded, "Why then do people like Kevin Hart and James Gunn not get forgiven and lose current work based on jokes made years ago in the past, while also having apologized for their jokes before they even became public outrage?" As she continues, MarzGurl goes on to state, "In my case, I absolutely believe I woke up. Like, with a snap of some fingers. Somebody told me I hurt them, and then it was like I downloaded the Matrix into my brain and realized I was a shitty human being. I wish to God I could pretend that wasn't me back then, but I can't. No, you're wrong. You're just upset that you were caught in the act. You can't simply go around accusing someone and ruining their livelihood without empirical evidence, and then when you get caught doing some stupid bullcrap behind the scenes, even if it is 10 years ago, Now you want to come out 10 years later and say, whoopsie, I'm sorry. You can't do that. Nobody can do that. Not a single person can be a hypocrite in having to ruin someone's life now when back 5, 10, 20 years ago they did some horrible things or said some horrible things that are relative to the overall narrative now. You can't do that. And I understand that people nowadays don't seek apology, they seek destruction. And of course, if MarzGurl is truly sorry from the depths of whatever soul she does have, then I do believe that should be accepted. However, if this is a PR stunt for her to just come out and saying, whoopsie, I'm sorry for saying that, then no, we shouldn't forgive you for your actions because of what you accused VIC MIGNOGNA of in ruining his livelihood. And it's not just MarzGurl, it's not just the entirety of the VIC MIGNOGNA situation. On this channel, later on within the next couple of days and weeks, we are going to be touching bases on many other things very similar to this, which correlates to gaming conventions, anime conventions, Hollywood, and many other topics and discussions we are going to have that are very eerily similar to the entire VIC MIGNOGNA situation. But nonetheless, I digress, and I will be coming back to MarzGurl by the end of this video with a very special clip from a user named EmoshisLive. But as we continue, do you guys remember Shane Holmberg? Well, of course, he's been on Twitter basically downplaying anyone that's been supporting VIC MIGNOGNA, as I do encourage people to challenge his intellectual stance, but do not harass him. I don't condone harassment because harassment basically gets you nowhere and it only ends up getting you blocked. But going as far as to seek the answers for your own questions that you may have for an individual, I think is harmless, because asking someone a question should not be condemned and or demonized as something less. But when we go back to Shane Holmberg, he had some interesting replies over on Twitter, as he went on to state, and I quote, "It is really awesome how so many people not in the US have had to join in Vic's supporters. That's how weak his support in the US is." As an individual that goes by the name of Marcus replies, "Yeah, that's a complete lie no matter what side you were on. You have to be delusional not to see that Vic has a lot of support. The GoFundMe kind of proves that." Meanwhile, Jamie Marchi struggled to raise a mere $5,000. As Shane continues, "Wow, let's just go with one, shall we? Pensacon, 34K mostly in the state attendees. Total amount donating to Vic worldwide, 3,601. The numbers support themselves." What the hell is Shane talking about? First of all, for Shane to insinuate on the idea that Vic doesn't have any supporters or as much supporters in the States in comparison to an international audience is not only mega egregious, but this makes Shane look like a complete idiot, because you are going to go as far as to speak on the behalf of VIC MIGNOGNA in letting us know how many fans he has in the States? Are you completely delusional? This guy's an idiot. But he continues as he goes on to state, and I quote, "Some of them are just whack. It was a discussion where they insisted if you don't go to the police, you are choosing to stay a victim. But we all know that that's not always an option. So going to the police is not an option. You idiots. Going to the police after being sexually assaulted and or possibly worse is the first place you ought to go to. People that do these things need to be put away, and that's why the police are there. Of course, we as citizens can't take the law in our own hands and go as far as to convict someone or beat someone or lock someone up. That's why the cops are there. That's why the police is there. If something happens to you, if someone burglarizes your house, if someone assaults you, if someone beats you up, if someone does anything to you, that's why the cops are there. So you can make a police report and putting these people away. So the question lingers within this community, if this happened with VIC MIGNOGNA, how come these alleged victims never went to the police? The police are the #1 sources to where if something bad happens, or if a law is broken, or something happens to an individual and or their family, that's why they're there, is to take the law into their own hands and putting someone away, locking them up, filing a police report, and going as far as to take that person to court and permanently putting them away. That's why this community keeps insisting, if this happened, how come not a single individual went to the police? Do you see how weird that is? So what you're basically insinuating is the fact that the police aren't an option. The police should be the #1 one option on that list, the first choice that someone should go with if they were assaulted in any kind of way. So do you see how weird that is? But nonetheless, I will be covering more of this within the next couple of hours and within the next couple of days, as we are going to be getting updates from Nick Ricetta and many others. I want to get your thoughts down below, guys. How do you guys feel about this? Because this is just so bizarre to me, how they're downplaying fans, and it's on a daily basis. They downplay fans, they're calling you dogs, they're calling you unintelligent, and they're basically trying to scrutinize you for supporting VIC MIGNOGNA. And I want to go ahead and get your thoughts in the comment section below about this entire situation, as once more I'm going to leave off with EmoshisLive's clip. Thank you all so much for watching, guys. Once more, if you guys are new to this channel, hit that subscribe button, slap a like down below if you guys support VIC MIGNOGNA, subscribe to my primary channel, UnrealNetwork, for more awesome anime and Dragon Ball discussions on there alongside gaming and much more. Follow me on Twitter at UnrealNetwork if you guys have anything you want me to cover. So again, thank you all so much for watching. I do appreciate every single one of you guys. Tune back in for the next video, and I'll be seeing you all down in the comment section below. So without wasting any more time, let's jump straight into the clip. Here we go.
So based on that, we can kind of see that Kaylin isn't necessarily concerned with correcting people just as long as they're allegedly supporting her. I don't think she should apologize for things that she said 10 years ago, especially if she meant it. And that brings us to the next part of this conversation, where we try to compare MarzGurl now to MarzGurl back then, to see if there has been a legitimate change. But there's one important note that I really want you guys to be able to think about in regards to comparing MarzGurl now to back then. And this is how we can prove, or at least, you know, assess, at least assume that she hasn't really changed all that much, is this idea that she says that she said these things because it was cool to be a shock jock edgelord back then. From the outside looking in, for me looking at you, right, it supports the idea, or it supports my suspicion that you said these things to draw some kind of attention to yourself, which kind of correlates to this whole, you know, birthing of a hashtag, and which also happens to correlate to people that have come forward with stories that don't necessarily add up to one another. And all MarzGurl could really do as she watched KickVic crumble to the ground is simply say that, well, I never really accused him of anything, I just simply support survivors. And because MarzGurl 10 years ago was on some kind of public setting, she has some kind of public platform where she knew people would be listening, where she knew that people would be following her for the things that she said, where she knew that if she said these things, she would get some kind of attention, while not really acknowledging the possible cons to this, or negative backlash to this, right? Because MarzGurl doesn't seem like the type of person to look towards the future, you know, and that's fine, especially if we know what the intention was behind it. We don't really have to assume what it was. We know that you were trying to be an edgelord. So how does that correlate to who MarzGurl is today? Well, one, she is still some kind of, you know, she has a platform. She uses that platform to make sure that her voice is heard, and she used that platform to start a hashtag. So with all that stuff about MarzGurl in mind, we can assess that 10 years ago she said these things in a public setting with the intention of looking like an edgelord, looking cool, or looking a certain way to the public eye, or at least towards a fan base she thought she had back then. And now the kind of fan base that she believes that she has now is the kind of fan base that is quote-unquote politically correct, you know, overly sensitive, arguably, you know, probably watches what he or she says, things like that, political correctness, right? And it's not to say that being politically correct doesn't come with its own fair share of drawbacks either. Hashtag KickVic is a dead example of that. It's dead proof of that. It's based on having a social media presence, right? So you can argue that even back then, 10 years ago, she said these things with the intent of looking cool, looking like an edgelord. And now she's saying these things with the intent of being politically correct, because a large portion of the fandom, or a large portion of the masses of the community and people on social media, you know, they cater to that kind of ideology and to that kind of rhetoric. So it's easy to come off as being politically correct, because it feels like that's the cool thing to do nowadays, right? Nowadays it's the cool thing to be politically correct. It's the cool thing to stand with survivors and victims, and to stand on the backs of people, and to not really do any work yourself. So now, after assessing who Kaylin Salcedo was 10 years ago, the things that she said 10 years ago, and, you know, her epiphany and her realization of how much of a shitty human being she was back then, we can look at some recent sequence of events. And to do that, we can look at Kaylin Salcedo's review of VIC MIGNOGNA's alleged or first statement after these allegations that came into play. So Kaylin Salcedo makes a thread She finishes it off with hashtag KickVic, by the way. That's her brand now. You know, she feels she's not a shitty human being at all, right? You know, she's changed for the better, right, guys? You know, let's break it down to see whether or not Kaylin Salcedo can be viewed by the fandom, by the general perception, because she tries so hard to, you know, look cool. The edgelord that she was back then, this is what it means to be an edgelord now. What it means to be an edgelord now is to be an SJW, right? To be branded as such and to label people who don't agree with you as alt-right. She's actually added VIC MIGNOGNA on Twitter and asked him to disavow the alt-right rhetoric that his supporters have, you know, portrayed, and that's a head scratcher. So let's jump into her review. Let's review her review of VIC MIGNOGNA's statement after being accused of all these allegations, okay? Alright, so this is likely to be my last thread on the subject unless some other earth-shattering information comes up, and earth-shattering information has came up over the past month or so. For starters, if you haven't seen Vic's response, here it is again, and we're gonna go through it together. So much like the podcast, she's invoking her following, you know, being a little smarter about the words that she uses, but it doesn't mean that the rhetoric changes, right? And this is how we can pretty much prove as a fandom, without having to prove intention, but we can prove that MarzGurl is still the same, you know, shitty human being that she claims that she isn't anymore. If there are certain behaviors that you have done that have made people feel uncomfortable, then just say you're sorry. Say you're sorry and that you will work to not repeat those behaviors, because, you know, it's entirely possible he's not homophobic. He's not obligated to do that, right? I think it's kind of like the same thing that you've done, MarzGurl, recently. You tried to portray yourself as being someone who is professional, someone who has claimed to change and not be the same person that you were those 10 years ago. And it's obvious, right? You only do this now because you're being called out on it, because it's being brought to light again, because you thought it was scrapped from the internet, because you claimed that the host and the co-host and that you and yourself realized that it was wrong, that you probably shouldn't have said those things, so that's why it was scrapped from the internet, but somehow some people dug it up. I mean, no, the internet doesn't forget things, that's one. It's not difficult to quote-unquote dig things up, which basically means that you're implying that we're basically going overboard in an effort to, you know, make it look like you're this horrible person. Might sound contradictory considering the context of this conversation, because context is very important to MarzGurl. It wasn't obligated to, you know, even address that, but it was the professional thing to do considering the fact that he has a fandom and X amount of a following, similar to you. Just like you didn't really have to apologize for the things you said back then, and I don't think you even did. You just basically accepted that you said these things. VIC MIGNOGNA is in a different position to where he constantly has to feel like he's being accused of being homophobic, which ironically enough doesn't really correlate to the original accusations that hashtag KickVic even came with to begin with, which was rape, pedophilia, and, you know, sexual assault. So at least the fact that he's acknowledging it, we should probably give him credit for that. He doesn't have to acknowledge it. And just because he doesn't want to sign content doesn't make him homophobic. The problem is people like you, the MarzGurl that you claim to, you know, this is a new MarzGurl. This is 2019 MarzGurl. We're not the same person that you were back then, right? It's people like you that accuse him of being homophobic. But ironically enough, it's also people like you at the same time to be professional and to at least portray yourself as being someone who is nice and someone who's a different person. You're also willing to acknowledge that he may not be homophobic simply because it makes you look good. Ironically enough, because being an edgelord back then made you look cool. So now this is the cool thing to do. It's not representative of who you are as a person.